I don't know what this might look like in your specific life, in your specific family, or your specific circumstances. But I just want to tell you from a mom who is years ahead of you and looking back with perspective, that more is not always better. Sometimes it's just more. Hi, I'm Sarah Short, your host of the No Way But Through podcast. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all things mom. How to parent through those exhausting days with your little ones, how to be intentional and connected with your big kids, and how to embrace what truly matters and let go of the rest. From life with a newborn to toddlers to teenagers and everything in between, I'll teach you foundational and practical strategies on how to walk through every season of motherhood with courage and creativity, all while prioritizing your relationships with your kids in a home life where all of you can thrive. My Nana once told me, there's no way but through. Turns out she was right in life and in motherhood. So come along with me as we become better moms together. This is the No Way But Through podcast. Hey y'all, welcome back into the No Way But Through podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Short, and just like every week before this one, I'm so glad to be back with you guys again today. I get asked from time to time, what are the best ways that you can support me here on this podcast? Everything I do here is for free, which is actually great with me. But if you want to support me, there are a couple of ways that you can do that. One, leave a review for me over on Apple Podcasts. This is a great free way for you to support my work over here, and it helps other moms and other parents find this podcast and be able to benefit from it as well. Number two, you can financially support this podcast. I am so grateful for the people who support my podcast monthly, as well as people who've given one-time gifts. This just helps me to be able to get new equipment or pay for the behind-the-scenes producing of this podcast. So anytime someone supports me, I'm just so grateful. And third, anytime you share one of my episodes on social media in your stories or in a post, even if you just share this podcast with a friend, that is a great way for you to support me in the work that I do here because it helps spread the word and get it out to people. So those are three ways that you can support what I do here. And every time, truly, every time one of you supports me in some way, I'm just so thankful. Y'all really are an amazing community of moms and dads in my real life friends that listen, my new friends, my community here. I'm just so thankful for all of you. Today's episode is one that is 20 years in the making. What I'm going to share with you today throws back to my very early days, not only as a mom, but as a wife and a mom. And I love sharing these kinds of episodes with y'all because I know that so many of you who listen to this podcast are new or young moms. And so when I go back 20 years and I'm telling you stories from back then, I know it's meeting a lot of you right where you are right now. A lot of the parenting that I'm doing today is with older kids and teenagers. And while that's really valuable, and I think I have some great insight into parenting older kids and teenagers, the things that I learned when I was a very young mom, I now have a lot of perspective on. It's been 15 or 20 years, a lot of the things that I share with you. And so it isn't just that I'm sharing with you in real time, like I was when I was blogging years ago and just documenting my experience and trying to pull out what I was learning at that time. But when I share with you now the things that I learned as a young mom, I have the very valuable gift of perspective. So if you clicked on this episode and you've got your headphones in or you're listening in your car, then the title didn't scare you away. And I'm so glad about that. Because I know that when we're going to talk about things that relate to money, it can make a lot of us want to run away. We don't want to feel guilty about how we're spending our money. We might not even want to talk to anybody else or hear anybody else's advice or thoughts on money. And when you couple that also with family and how your family is spending their money, and it's just all wrapped up in that, I know that it can be something that you just don't want to hear about. On the other hand, maybe that title intrigued you, and that's why you're listening right now. Like, what is Sarah going to say about these two financial decisions she and her husband made that made their family closer? And maybe you've been listening for a year and you've come to trust my voice and you know who I am, at least a little bit now, if we're not friends in real life. And you have a general curiosity to know and understand what I might want to share around this. No matter how you're feeling pulling up this podcast, I want to tell you that I'm really glad you're here. And I think you will walk away from listening to this episode feeling encouraged and maybe challenged a little bit, but definitely inspired. And honestly, that's my goal. I want you to feel encouraged and maybe inspired and to give you some really good things to think about in your own life and circumstances as a family, and maybe to be challenged a little bit, maybe how to think differently in some ways. Today's episode is going to be more storytelling than it is prescriptive. What I'm going to share with you today is our experience, my and Jason's experience, and 2 decisions that we made that indeed have made our family closer. What I am not going to do today is tell you what to do. And I am certainly not telling you that you should do things the way we did them in these areas. Families are different. Circumstances are different. Y'all, I have been shouting that to you from the very early days of this podcast that started over a year ago. And I'm going to repeat the same thing right now that I've told you over and over as well. There is not one right way to parent or to live out your life as a family. There are so many different ways to parent things. And it's one of the things I love most about having friends and living in community with people and seeing how they do things that are different than we do them, learning from others and taking what works for me and letting go of the rest, still being willing to be challenged by others and the choices that they make, but then living in freedom, knowing that God is guiding our decision-making over here at the Shorts and is with us in all of it. So I hope you'll go into this episode knowing that I'm not giving you a prescription on what to do. I'm sharing with you our story and how 2 specific decisions impacted our family in such a great way and impacted me and Jason in such a powerful way. And not to tell you that you should do things the way we did them, but to give you some really good things to think about. And even as I'm starting to record this podcast today, I already know that I'm going to give you that. I think you will leave here with some really good things to think about as parents. So what are they? What are these 2 financial decisions we made that made our family closer? Number 1, we only had 1 car. Let me give you the backstory. Jason and I got married as 2 young working adults. We each had a car of our own, cars that we both bought independently when we graduated from college and brought into our marriage. I drove a Ford Explorer, which was my dream car at the time. When I graduated from college and I got my first big girl job, which is what I always called it, one of the first things I did was to trade in my broken down 1987 Toyota Corolla SR5 for a Ford Explorer Sport Edition. It was a 2-door car, it was stick shift, and I absolutely loved that car. Jason had a Honda Civic that he bought when he graduated from college, and that's how we started our marriage. And a couple of years into our marriage, as we started to think about starting a family, I traded in my Explorer for a larger Chevy Tahoe, which remains one of my favorite cars I've ever driven. About a year later, we welcomed our son Jack into the world, and we brought him home in our brand new burgundy Chevy Tahoe, and that was the same Tahoe that we loaded up and moved to Michigan a couple of years later. I had baby Max shortly after we moved to Michigan, and then as I was pregnant with my 3rd child, I realized that a minivan was going to be a great help to me in the cold Michigan winters. I wanted doors that would slide open and close and that my kids could climb in and out on their own, and I wasn't heisting car seats up into a higher level Tahoe that was 10 times the size that I was. So we bought our first minivan just before our 3rd son, Lincoln, was born. 2 years after he was born, we left Michigan and moved to Raleigh. We were packing up our house and getting ready to move back across the country again, and Jason decided to sell his Honda with the intention that we would get a new car for him when we arrived in Raleigh. So along with the moving truck across the country, we as a family of 5, we came back east in our minivan with our 3 young sons and moved into an apartment for a few months while we looked for a house. When we decided to leave Michigan and move back east, Jason kept his job, but at that point, he would become a work-from-home guy. This was in 2010, and there weren't many people working from home at that point. In fact, I think he was one of only maybe 2 people in his entire company that worked remotely. So when we got to Raleigh and we moved into our apartment, Jason was working from home in one of the bedrooms in our apartment. I was pregnant again with our 4th son. We only had our 1 car, our minivan. We decided that we just spent a whole lot of money moving, and we would wait until we got settled into our new house for Jason to get a car. He was working from one of the bedrooms, like I mentioned, in our apartment. And so I would take the kids out from time to time during the day to the park or to the pool. But otherwise, we were all just spending all of our time together getting to know our new city. A couple of months later, we bought our first home in Raleigh. That was in the middle of July 2010, and I was pregnant and due with our 4th son, Whit, in August. We decided that we just moved and we're adding a new baby to the family, so we'd wait until after Whit was born for Jason to get a car. After all, I was going to be home settling into life with my 4th son, and Jason was working from home, traveling from time to time. I suppose it was shortly after Whit was born that we started to think maybe we didn't need another car. Now, hear me out on this. Everyone we knew had 2 cars. Every family we knew had 2 cars. All of our family members that were married had 2 cars. All of our friends, their families, they had 2 cars. But as we looked at our life, even in those early months with baby Whit in my arms, Jason and I started to see something. We began to realize that we loved what was happening to us as young parents. We were doing everything together. Instead of him taking the older boys to the park and me going to the grocery store while they were gone, we just all went to the park and then went to the grocery store together afterwards. Since Jason was traveling quite a bit and that was actually picking up as the months went by, we would all load up into the car and drop him off at the airport instead of him taking a car and just parking it there for a few days. And when he'd return home, we would all go hang out, me and my little boys. We'd go hang out at the airport observation area and watch the airplanes while we waited for Daddy's plane to arrive. Those months turned into 6 years. Every time we would think about getting a second car, it just seemed that whatever reasons we were thinking of doing it for never quite nudged us enough to go get one. And as those months turned into years, the doing everything together and overcoming the obstacles that only 1 car put in front of our family, those things became really precious to us and began to mold our family into something different. I wasn't going one way and Jason was going another. I wasn't taking 2 kids and going somewhere while he was taking 2 and going somewhere else. We couldn't. Or I guess I should say, we were choosing not to. Now, I want to say 2 things here. The first is that I had wanted to blog about this many years ago when all of this was happening in real time when I had a blog. And I was beginning to process what I saw happening in my family through Jason working from home and us choosing to only have 1 car. But I remember thinking that his experience with working from home was so out of the ordinary, so very specific to our family and just not the experience of my friends around me at all, that I just didn't feel like I wanted to blog about it or really talk about it because I didn't think anyone would really be able to understand, or it would mostly get dismissed as, well, your husband works from home. That's just not the case with my husband. And so I just didn't know if it would actually be helpful. And y'all, the world needs less noise, not more noise. So I didn't want to share our experience and risk anyone feeling badly based on what I was saying we were doing. You guys get it, right? But now, So many people work from home. So many of my friends' husbands work from home. So many of my friends work from home. So many of the young moms that I mentor, they work from home or their husbands work from home. And all of that was brought about by the pandemic, right? I remember when March of 2020 hit and everybody was all of a sudden working from home, Jason's phone and email and texts were blowing up because all of these men in his life, these guys that he worked with for 20 years and his friends in real life, and then friends of friends of friends, were all texting and emailing him and calling and saying, Jason, dude, how do you do this work from home thing? I need tips. I need you to tell me what technology I need, like what's going to make this easier. How do I handle working with my kids while my kids are at home? Jason all of a sudden was this resource for everybody because he'd been working at home for 10 years. So I feel like I can share this with you now because it doesn't seem so crazy that someone would be working from home and maybe a family might have one car, right? Here's the second thing I want to say, and this is so important for me to share with you. Us only having one car for those 6 years, even though Jason was working from home, was an incredibly difficult sacrifice. Y'all, it was hard. I shared with you about the airport pickups because Uber and stuff wasn't as big back then. And so you kind of needed someone to take you to the airport. And so y'all, there were many late nights when Jason's flight would get delayed coming in from a business trip. And I had all 4 or 5 of my kids in the back of our minivan. And we were circling around the area at the airport waiting for him to land. We're talking 11 o'clock at night, my kids not in bed, me waiting for my husband to come home from a business trip so that I could pick him up from the airport. We also had multiple kids playing on different baseball teams during those years. Jack was on one team and Max was on another. And so we would oftentimes have to have 2 kids at baseball practice at 2 different locations at the same time. What are you going to do when you're new in town and you have 2 kids and one has to be somewhere at 6:30 and the other one has to be somewhere else at 7 and you have one car? Well, I would drop Jason and Max off at 6:30 at practice, and then I would drive over to the field where Jack was having his practice, and I would sit there with my younger kids through his practice, and then when his was over, I would head back over and pick up Jason and Max at theirs. Of course, theirs ended earlier because it started earlier, and I would find them as I pulled up sitting on a curb or sitting on a park bench, just talking about life and baseball and school and all the things that dads and their 7-year-old sons talk about. We had one car. It's what we had to do. It was also during this season that I was leading worship at my church. I would lead worship once or twice a month for our weekend services at our church, and I had to be there at 1 p.m. on Saturday afternoons for rehearsal, and then I'd help lead worship at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. for those services, and I'd finish up around 7:30 at night. Every week, Jason and my kids would drive the 20 minutes up to church and drop me off at 1 p.m., and then they would be back there at 7:30 p.m. waiting to pick me up. The next morning on Sundays, I had to lead worship for 3 more services and had to be at church at 7 a.m. And so Jason would load up all of our babies into our minivan, and Jason would drop me off at church at 7 a.m., bring the kids back home, feed them, get them dressed for church, come back and attend church, and then they'd take me home at 1 p.m. with them when the 3 services were over. I'll never forget this Saturday evening. Jason texted me and said that he'd be there at 7:30 to pick me up as usual, but that he and the kids were at Waffle House having dinner, and one of them had just spilled water all over themselves and the table. But they were having such a good time. And then Holly, my 1-year-old baby, he texted me that she had just gone down the slide by herself for the first time at the park, and that if I wanted, he could pick me up at 7:30 and we could head back to the park so that I could see her go on the slide before we headed home. What people in their right minds would choose this? What people who have the financial resources to buy another car would live 6 years during one of the busiest seasons of their lives as parents without a second car? What would make someone do that or want to do that? Well, we did this because we saw what it was doing to and in our family. We did everything together. We made choices out of necessity to do things together when maybe we would have preferred not to. Our kids learned so much about putting each other before themselves. When Max was sitting with his dad on that park bench after his baseball practice, waiting 30 or 45 minutes for his mom and brothers to arrive to pick him up and take him home, he was learning to wait. He was learning even then that life wasn't and never would be all about him. His brother had practice too. When my kids sacrificed week after week for their mama to go use her gifts and lead worship at church, and had to wake up at 6:30 a.m. on Sunday morning so that Dad could take Mom to church, my kids learned that serving sacrificially was not only good for Mom, but something God was asking of our whole family. They got to see me using my gifts, and me using my gifts required sacrifice not just of me, but of them too, and that was good for them. When we loaded up in the car and went through the drive-thru at McDonald's, and they got a sundae, and we took it to the airport, and we waited for Daddy to come home, my kids got to see and experience that there is so much value in picking up the people you love from the airport. Shout out to When Harry Met Sally. If you haven't watched that movie, there's a whole thing about that in there. The memories that we made on those airport trips to get their dad either to drop him off for a few days of working out of town, or the joy that we experienced together as we waited for him to come home and he finally climbed into the car underneath those Delta signs. They bonded us and they made us closer as a family. These things that are making me tear up now are the reasons that we never got another car for 6 years. Jason and I both saw what was happening to us and what was happening in our family and what was happening to our kids, and we didn't want to lose it. We didn't want to go in different directions all of a sudden because we could. We didn't want Jason's car to sit at the airport for a few days so that he could drive himself to and from there in convenience. And we would miss out on the squeals of joy that happened from the back seats when he walked out of Terminal 2. Am I telling you to only have one car? Emphatically, no, absolutely not. But here's what I am telling you. The discovery of living with sacrifice for a time forced a change in our family that we didn't realize we wanted. We didn't choose not to get another car because we had all of this wisdom. We didn't get a second car because it was expensive and I was 8 months pregnant and we were living in an apartment and we had sold Jason's car before we moved to Raleigh, and any idea of car shopping in a new state, in a new city just felt really overwhelming to us, so we didn't do it. We didn't choose this because we thought there would be good in it. We didn't know. We were really young parents. But what began to unfold right in front of us revealed to us in those 6 years that we were gaining so much more in having one car in that season than we would ever gain from having two. Our kids were learning to sacrifice for each other and for their parents. Our kids were learning to wait and to be patient. Our kids live in a world where everything is instant, where they're not waiting for anything. Instant gratification is king to so many of our kids today. Do you know that Google reports that people will leave a site if a web page takes longer than 3 seconds to load? My kids learned to wait. Is waiting always fun? No, of course not. But they learned during that season to be patient for your ride, for your dad's airplane to land, for your mom to be done singing on stage and serving at church. And our family was bonding in this really unique and special way because we did almost everything together. So, what happened after 6 years? Well, we got a second car. In 2016, we had 4 boys playing on 4 different baseball teams at 4 different locations and at 4 different times around the city of Raleigh. Our kids were no longer all in the same elementary school together, so we were going to have 1 in middle school, 3 in elementary, a baby at home, and it just felt like this was the right time to get a second car. And so we did. And that ended our time of being a 1-car family. But the things that we learned and the bonding that happened during those years when my kids were really little and we had 1 car are things we carry with us now, all of us. The effects of that decision ripple through my family even today. When people ask me, how is it that your family is so close, Sarah? Why are y'all so bonded? What is it that you're doing? Sometimes I just want to say, well, we only had 1 car for 6 years. Because that's absolutely true. There are, of course, many other things that go into that. And some of them we've already talked about here on this podcast, ways to make your family bond and ways to be closer. But here's what I want to share with you today as it relates to this story about our 6 years with 1 car. God gave us something that we didn't know we wanted. He gave us something that we didn't even know to ask for or pursue. He didn't give us more. He didn't reveal to us that we needed more or extra and then provided it. What God revealed to us during those years was that it was in less that we gained so much more than we could have imagined. I don't know what this might look like in your specific life, in your specific family, or your specific circumstances. But I just want to tell you from a mom who is years ahead of you and looking back with perspective, that more is not always better. Sometimes it's just more. Our 6 years with our 1 car taught us that and so much more. And it was this financial decision that we made when we didn't know if we wanted to spend money on a new car, a second car for our family. It was that financial decision that led to so much good, so many blessings, so many incredible memories with our kids and our family together that we wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And it bonded us closer and gave us such a gift. Number 2. The second financial decision we made that's made our family closer, we bought a smaller home. So let's rewind back to some more storytelling. When Jason and I first got married, we bought a small house in the suburbs of Baltimore. His uncle had encouraged us that if we possibly could afford a house, to buy one because real estate would be a great investment with our money. We loved our little house and we loved to host parties there with our college friends, and it was the sweetest house to start our marriage. When we moved to Michigan, we rented a home, a couple of homes actually, while we waited for our house in Baltimore to sell, which was a really difficult financial time for us. And after our house in Baltimore sold, we began to look for a permanent house in Michigan. After looking for a couple of months, I saw a listing for a sprawling ranch on 2 acres of land in a suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We walked into that house and I immediately fell in love with it. It had the biggest, most beautiful kitchen, and I was doing so much cooking and blogging and creating recipes back then, and it was just a dream. It had room after room after room for all of my boys to have their own rooms, many bathrooms, and an absolutely gigantic basement that had the best playroom I'd ever seen. Room for my boys to run inside and play. It had another guest room, another bathroom down there, a theater room, and an office. And outside, my boys had acres to run and play. It was an absolute dream home for me. We bought that house and moved in a month later into our dream home. So much room, so many beautiful finishes, a hill for sledding, and a private road for bike riding. Lincoln, my third son, was just a few months old at the time, so I had three little boys at home. And as we settled into that home, I would curl up with my baby in one of our family rooms, the one particularly off the kitchen, and I would hear the faint sounds of Jason playing with my two older boys down in the basement, which was on a completely opposite end of the house. I have this very distinct memory of looking around that house with all of these different rooms to choose from and wondering if I should just head down for a few minutes down to the basement to hang out with Jason and the boys when it hit me. Why do we have this big, huge house? I just cooked the same dinner that I cooked in our kitchen in Baltimore that hardly had room for both me and Jason to stand in it. And the dinner didn't taste any better cooked in my big fancy kitchen as it did on my tiny stove in Baltimore. We have this large cavernous house, and I needed to go bathe the baby and get him to bed, and my boys were downstairs giggling and laughing with Jason, and they felt so far away. Different versions of this story happened in the 18 months that we owned that house. I would always feel so proud when people would come over to visit us, especially new friends in Michigan, because we finally settled into a home and Jason's work friends would come over, people from church would come over, and I just felt so proud of our big, beautiful, cavernous house. And yet, I would cry on the chair in the room off the kitchen that was close to my bedroom because my older boys and my husband, I could hear their faint laughter, and it felt like they were a world away to me. I remember feeling so frustrated with myself because isn't this the house I wanted? Isn't the fancy kitchen and the 2 acres of land and thousands upon thousands of square feet what I wanted? It wasn't. What I wanted was to be close with my family. What I wanted was for all of us to be curled up in the same family room off the kitchen while my boys wrestled at my feet and I nursed my new baby and my husband made a drink in the kitchen and we lived life close and together. What I thought was going to make me so happy, the big house, the fancy house, the big plot of land in the fancy neighborhood on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, actually made me incredibly sad. Bigger isn't always better. More doesn't always make us happier. We know this, right? My favorite thing that I own is also the smallest thing that I own. My engagement ring. I don't have the fanciest engagement ring or the biggest or most expensive diamond. I got my ring from my recently graduated college boyfriend. But I don't love my engagement ring because of how flashy or impressive it is. I love it because of what it did to my life and heart. It opened a door to my dreams coming true and to the hardest relationship work I've ever done. But it opened the door to marrying Jason, building a family together, and fighting for each other while we fight with each other. It opened the door to me being a mom. And the same is true of my home. I don't have the fanciest or biggest home. We don't have rooms that we never use or lots of extra space for all of us to retreat to. But I don't love my home because of how flashy or impressive it is. I love it because of what it did to my life and heart, what it's done to my family, the closeness we share in part and not a small part is because we have one family room and all 7 of us share it. We have countless memories that we've made in that room, and those walls have witnessed some of the best moments of my life. We've had families pile in there for game nights, single friends who we've loved to see snuggle up with our kids for movie nights, teenagers flopped all over on pillows and jumping on the sofa, cheering for basketball games. We've never needed more space. We've never needed fancier furniture or updated everything. What our hearts have longed for is what we've got, each other, and an open door to love people well. We have a beautiful home. And big or little is all relative, right? What makes a house big? I don't know. That's a question each of us have to answer, right? Based on our own experiences and circumstances, what we're bringing to the table from our growing up years, and what we've seen. But I am so thankful Jason and I learned this as very young parents. The big house didn't deliver what we thought it would. The amazed eyes of our new friends walking in and seeing our big, awesome house in Michigan didn't make up for my lonely tears when we spread out and went separate ways inside our home. More isn't always better. In fact, I would say it rarely is. It's important for me to say this here. When we were buying our home that we currently live in now, there were certain things that were deal breakers for us, right? We weren't trying to inflict severe inconvenience on ourselves or on our kids for the sake of living this way or choosing this. In 2019, we remodeled a lot of our house to make it function better for our family. When we moved into this house, all 4 of our boys were sharing a bedroom. 1 was living in a closet. And we just felt like as they got into high school, that probably wasn't the best idea. So we finished some space over our garage and we remodeled some of our upstairs to accommodate our boys having some separate bedrooms. A couple of them still share a bedroom, and so it's not like everyone got their own room. And if you were to ask my boys, they would tell you that those years that they shared all 4 in the same room were some of their favorites. But make no mistake, they are thrilled to have some of their own rooms now. So we did remodel it to make it work better for our family. We also gave our kids a loft upstairs by chopping up one of the bedrooms up there, and they have an area upstairs now where they love to play Xbox. We have 5 kids who love to play video games, and so we gave them a loft area upstairs to do that. And so what I am not saying is that all we do inside our home is spend all of our time together in a family room. That's unrealistic. That's not what happens. We have normal teenagers who love to go upstairs and slam their door and not talk to us sometimes. But y'all, we can think that the bigger things, the bigger vacations and the bigger house and the bigger, better cars, the bigger house with the playroom and the house that has the big lot that has the perfectly manicured backyard and the fancy neighborhood is going to give us a close and bonded family and make us happier. And you know what? It might. I don't know your exact circumstances. But for us, with now years of perspective and a little bit further down the road for most of you young parents, I wanted to share these 2 things with you because it's countercultural to what the world tells us. It's countercultural to what we see on social media and maybe even what we see in our own friend groups, in our communities of people, and in our extended families. As we close up today, let me finish by saying it was never about houses and cars for us. That's why I wanted to say right from the beginning here that what I was sharing with you today was not to be prescriptive. I'm not telling you what to do. Well, I'm hardly ever sitting here telling you what to do, but I am not suggesting to you that you only have 1 car and that you buy a small house. I hope I've made that clear. But for us, that's what it practically looked like. For us, the specifics involve just having 1 car for a long season and for buying much less house than we could afford. But it's not about houses and cars. This was always about us, our family. For me and Jason, these decisions were always about what we were modeling for our kids, what we wanted to see develop in them, and what we wanted to see develop in us, and never wanting anything to be a hindrance to us growing closer and more bonded as a family, being able to serve and love other people well, and being able to teach our kids to walk faithfully and humbly with God and to cherish the relationships in their lives. You know, I'm sitting here laughing because we currently have 5 cars in my family right now. We have 3 kids that drive, 1 who's away at college, 1 that lives at home and goes to college, and 1 who's in high school, his junior year, who has a car that our neighbor gave to us. Thank you, Jesus, for her. And I'm sitting out here in my sunroom that we remodeled a few years ago, where I love to retreat from time to have some quiet so that I can work or rest or watch something on TV out here. It's not about houses and cars. What I want to encourage you with today is to just think about your life as parents. Are there ways that you are longing for more when more might not be the answer or what you're looking for? Are there areas of your life where you think you can't live without something, but in reality, that something might actually be detrimental to the goals that you have for your family, to the kids that you want to send out into the world as adults, and the closeness you want to share together? Are you looking around at others and what they have? And gosh, if I just had that, we'd be happier. Because if I can do anything today, what I want to do is to give you things to think about in your own heart. Are there things about your circumstances that are making you really discontent because you want more, when right in front of you might be all you need? As we close out, I want to read you an excerpt from an article by Jim Harbaugh, who is the current coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, but was the head coach at the University of Michigan the last few years. His brother, John Harbaugh, is the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and their dad, Jack Harbaugh, was a football coach as well. Y'all know my family. We are big Ravens fans. If you don't know that, then you're definitely not over on Instagram with us. But it wasn't until recently that some of the stories of John and Jim growing up in the Harbaugh household that I became familiar with some of those stories. John and Jim, when interviewed, will oftentimes bring up a phrase their dad used with them when they were growing up. Who's got it better than us? Let me read to you from an article that Jim wrote in 2016. When I was growing up, there was a local car dealer in Ann Arbor that had a program where the coaches at Michigan got to drive the extra dealer cars. We didn't have much money, and we didn't have a car of our own, so my parents shared the dealer car. Sometimes my dad, brother, and I would walk outside and the car would be in the driveway. Other times, if my mom was out, it wasn't. Hey, Dad, where's the car? No car today, guys. We're walking. Grab a basketball. 100 with the right, 100 with the left. Let's go. And we'd dribble down the sidewalk, Dad leading the way, yelling, "Who's got it better than us?" Me and my brother trailing behind, chanting, "Nobody!" More often than not, it would be my dad who had the car, out on a long recruiting trip. Recruiting wasn't like it is today with planes and private jets. Recruiting took a lot longer. He'd be on the road for months at a time, coming home on the weekends whenever he could. Sometimes weeks would go by and we wouldn't see him or the car. So my mom took charge, and she was just like my dad. "Mom, where's the car?" "No car today, guys. We're walking. Grab a basketball." That's how both my parents were. They made everything exciting growing up, even not having a car. Sometimes we'd be sitting down watching TV and my dad would tell me and my brother to run upstairs and grab him something. He would time us every time. It was like the world record was on the line. My brother and I both wanted that world record, so we'd run upstairs as fast as we could to see who could get back to my dad first. He would make us compete. Or maybe he just really wanted a beer as fast as he could possibly get it. I shared a room with my brother for 16 years, and my dad always made us feel like that was the greatest thing in the world. Like we had this whole house, and my brother and I had a special piece of it all to ourselves. Never mind the fact that most kids wanted, and a lot of kids had, their own rooms. We were lucky to share a room. We got to share each other's stories, each other's dreams. Who's got it better than you guys? Nobody, Dad. That's how it was in our house. A lot of excitement, a lot of competition, a lot of love. Later on, we realized, okay, maybe some people did have it better. But my parents were right about just about everything. It's staggering how right they were. Maybe having an exciting childhood in a loving home is as good as it gets. And we had that. So how could anybody have it better? Y'all, more doesn't always deliver. Living up to anybody else's standard will often lead you to emptiness and longing that can never be satisfied. In my life, ultimately, my satisfaction in my joy and the peace that I live with, and that is the place where I speak to you from on this podcast, comes from my relationship with Jesus. I've told y'all that before. I'm so grateful to know him and to live for him. But y'all, in my everyday life, specifically as a parent, as a mom, I'm so grateful that Jason and I made these two decisions that started as financial decisions and morphed into something so much more. Even now, as we're in a financial position to make changes to our life that would look fancier and flashier and more, what I value most is the closeness that I share with my kids and my family and the way that we use what we have to love other people well. We pile into our family room on Ravens game Sundays, all together, cheering for our favorite team in the only family room we've got. I'm so grateful for it. Lots to think about after this one, y'all. See you next time. You've just listened to another episode of the No Way But Through podcast. If you want to connect with other like-minded moms and join our growing online community, head on over to Instagram and follow along with us at No Way But Through. You can always reach me over there throughout the week. And if you'd like to financially support this podcast, there's a link at the bottom of every episode where you can do just that.